Hi friends, I'm Jeffy G. I bet you're like me and you've got more than a dozen reverbs. Well, there's all different types, right? There's spring reverbs and plate reverbs and chamber reverbs, and there's two leading technologies that make those sounds. The first is convolution and the others are algorithmic. I'm going to lead you through not just the different types of reverbs, but give you some advice on how to use them and when, and some of the strategies that I apply. So if you think you've got too many and you're not sure how to use them, this video is for you. At a high level, I've got certain standard reverbs that I use for things like vocals and drums, and I use those every day. Then I've got a category of reverb plugins that are unusual, that really alter the sound, and I use them in special cases for a special effect or a unique sound that borders on sound design. So you can use reverb in some creative ways. Let me show you what I mean.
I like to keep things pretty simple.
Base, who is on first?
Have you got a first baseman on first?
Certainly.
Then who's playing first?
Absolutely.
When it comes to reverb, and I've been using Logic for a lot of years, so I'm very familiar with Logic. Consequently, one of my favorite reverbs to start with is ChromaVerb. And I think ChromaVerb is underrated. It has a lot more features than you realize at first. It's got pre-delay, which is great to limit the amount of the track frequencies that are subject to the reverb. And it has a details view where you can make tweaks and customizations to how that reverb gets applied. Output EQ, which adjusts just like any other EQ. Furthermore, it's got default rooms. You click on the room and you've got everything from concert hall, chamber, to a reflective hall. And there's extensive presets. Ambience, reverb for predefined things like drums, vocals. There's some interesting effects, cave, weird space. Got quite an assortment of chambers, halls, rooms, spaces, and then you've got some weird synth reverbs that you can use. So as an algorithmic reverb, it's pretty darn good.
If you think you're getting away, I will prove you wrong. I'll take you all the way, boy, just come along.
I'm controlling all of these things with a bus. I like to do it that way. So if you want less, you can reduce the bus. Just pick one of the presets in here to give you an idea. Here's vocal plate.
If you think you're getting away, I will prove you wrong. I'll take you all the way, boy, just come along.
Let you hear that dry, this bypassed.
If you think you're getting away, I will prove you wrong.
You have something to compare to. Now, a lot of people will argue that the Valhalla reverbs and delays are better. And I would say that they are equally good. They are very popular for several reasons. With Logic, you get 4 different reverbs to choose from, including ChromaVerb. But with some of the other DAWs, it doesn't necessarily come with a really good reverb. And that's one of the reasons Valhalla is so popular. Now, I've used Valhalla. It also has a lot of options for the mix, the pre-delay, the decay, basically the same parameters that you might see in ChromaVerb. And it's got great assortment of presets. There's a lot to choose from here. Everything from some gated sounds to halls, plates, rooms, spaces. It's quite extensive. Don't let the simple GUI fool you. It's powerful and I use it occasionally myself. But I do think ChromaVerb is underrated. And since it comes free with Logic, why not use it? The other reverb that I like using a lot, also from Logic as a starting point for me, is Space Designer. And I would say this is their flagship convolution reverb. You've got an algorithmic reverb and all the advantages of that in ChromaVerb. But here you've got a convolution reverb with its ability to import impulse responses from any source you want or create your own. It's pretty good. It has a long list of presets. And when you start digging into these presets, you'll see that every preset has a time associated with it, which relates to the length of the impact response. So you've got medium spaces, small spaces, warp effects, surround spaces, lots of good stuff in there. I often just set this to a particular room size, say a bright chamber. Then I play around with the pre-delay, size, spread over the stereo spectrum, and how I want that to be executed.
If you think you're getting away, I will prove you wrong.
And I might use this on drums, vocals, or a particular instrument. In fact, if you come from a guitar world or string instruments world, you're probably used to managing reverb as an impact response. And this tool really does everything you could possibly want it to do. And much like ChromaVerb, you've got the volume envelope, which you can see here is drawn as a graph. You've got a filter envelope, which you can play around with. And you've got output EQ, which you can adjust as well. So it has a look and feel similar to the ChromaVerb. So beyond the logic delivered reverbs, I'm going to move on to things that emulate classic reverb sounds. And that's where I head over to Universal Audio. I like their Pure Plate plugin, and you can get this either the hardware version that works with Apollo, or you can get the Native X that'll work with any audio interface. Of course, I'm going to take advantage of my Apollo audio interface and its DSP, partly to save CPU, but I also believe that the quality of sound from some of the UAD plugins does depend a little bit on the hardware. So here we have an emulation of the UAD Pure Plate, and it has quite an assortment of presets, everything from vocals to drums. I'll use this on instruments, but I particularly like it on vocals. And it's a controllable, definable sound that is a legacy sound. You don't necessarily get that from the convolution reverbs or the algorithmic reverbs. The other one I like from UAD is the Lexicon 224 digital reverb, which is a faithful recreation of the actual Lexicon 224 device. So I use this one as well. Part of this comes from my own legacy of using third-party gear in the recording process. And rather than own that gear, these plugins do a really good job of representing how that gear sounds. So if I'm looking for like an 80s snare in a ballad that has a really big digital reverb, this is where I'm going to find it. So it comes down to those four. It comes down to ChromaVerb, Space Designer, both from Logic, Pure Plate, and the Lexicon 224 from UAD. Those are my favorites, and those are my starting points. But that doesn't tell the whole story.
What would you do with a brain if you had one?
Beyond some of the basics that we've covered, there are some modern reverbs that I really like. This one from Strymon is called Big Sky. Now, Strymon has a strong reputation for guitar effects pedals, and if you come from that world, they've kind of consolidated all of their best reverb algorithms into this plugin. And it's not inexpensive, but sometimes you get what you pay for. They call it a multi-dimensional reverb. Reverbs typically come from two sources. There are emulations of classic hardware, like the Lexicon 480L or the EMT 140 or the TC6000. And then there's impact response reverbs, of which we've looked at. Those are called convolution reverbs, that try to mimic the ambient sound attached to some classic reverb sources. But this is a little bit different. This includes 12 algorithms with all the parameters you can see. It's a very comfortable layout, but they've gone beyond the basics to include what I would call some creative algorithms for things like pitch shifting, filtering, formant controls. Those things extend reverb from just being a traditional tool into a sound design tool. That allows you as the user to create your own sonic signature. And that's a term they've come up with, but that sonic signature could define your sound. So let's just give a listen to called Shimmer.
Whenever I hear goodbye, remind me, baby, of you. I break down and cry.
So in the background, you're hearing 2-octave higher regen of the reverb, which is really interesting. You still got your source. It's got some reverb attached to it, but you've got the regen coming through at a much higher octave, and it kind of builds it out. Now, on its own, I've accentuated it or exaggerated it for the demo, but when you build this into a song, it does add some really interesting extra sound that you wouldn't get from a normal reverb. What else here? You've got this magneto capability. The sound of a tape machine recording and playing back reverb with a number of heads.
Whenever I hear goodbye, remind me, baby, of you. I break down and cry.
With the diffusion tied up, we're hearing an echo effect. And that echo effect borders on really delay and not just reverb. So in this realm of sound design or creativity with reverb, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Valhalla SuperMassive. I've had it for years, it's free, you can download it, and it's a combined reverb, delay, and modulation effect. So when you look at the presets, you'll find there's a big variety there, just concentrating kind of on the reverbs. Here's a vocal without any effects.
If you think you're getting away, I will prove you wrong.
Let me choose a reverb called Billions and Billions.
If you think you're getting away, I will prove you wrong. I'll take you all the way, boy, just come along.
Just go through a few other presets here.
If you think you're getting away, I will prove you wrong. I'll take you all the way, boy, just come along.
So there's a lot to take in. Valhalla SuperMassive is still pretty good, but I have found modern new alternatives that I think are pretty useful, including this last one that I'm going to look at. The last one I'm looking at here is Neoverb from Izotope. And like many Izotope plugins, it has a listening capability and an assistant that will set the reverb for you. It's similar to Nectar or Neutron or some of the other tools. It's a little more complex in that regard. Because you have to understand what it's doing and how to control the reverb. So how the Reverb Assistant works is you click on Reverb Assistant and it has some high-level parameters that you can set before it goes into the analysis mode. So the degree of dynamics or how dramatic that sound is going to be, whether the reverb is small, medium, or large. And then you've got some tone presets for dark, bright, or clean. And after you've selected those, you click on next, and then you play your track.
Whenever I hear goodbye, remind me, baby, of you. I break down and cry.
Doesn't take long to come up with its settings. Click on accept, and you'll see what it's done. It's created a pre-EQ to limit the frequencies that are included in the reverb. It's kept the reverb EQ, which is on the output side, pretty flat. I mean, you could tweak this as you see fit after you've listened to it, but it's also selected amongst these three reverb engines, including in Neoverb. It's put the emphasis over here on these two reverb engines, and it's ignoring this third reverb engine. Now, each of those reverb engines has some settings that you can reveal by clicking on this button, and you'll see there's reflections, plate, and hall. You could change these three to any of the presets, but these are kind of the default position. So let's give it a listen with the reverb applied that Izotope thinks is appropriate for this track.
Whenever I hear goodbye, remind me, baby, of you. I break down and cry.
So it's quite subtle. I mean, if you want to increase the space of any of these things or the emphasis, you can use these circles as faders. You can do things like time size, of course, increase the size, and even the degree of diffusion and attack. The parameters for each one of these vary depending on what you're selecting. So in this case, I've got the Hall algorithm, but if I choose a different algorithm, I'll get different options for customizing the sound. The sound you hear between these three reverb engines can be automated. So as I'm playing it, I can move this around and record those movements as automation. So if you want a different reverb at the end of the chorus than at the beginning, this is one way you could do it.
Whenever I hear goodbye, remind me, baby, of you. I break down and cry.
And that automation data is stored in your DAW and can be managed just like any other automation. Now, the history of Neoverb is pretty interesting. Izotope acquired a company called Exponential Audio, and they had two products, Stratus 3D and Symphony 3D. Those products are still available. And they were very advanced reverb engines that handle surround sound, Atmos, or multi-channel, up to 24 channels. I know Izotope has taken the algorithms that they acquired from those two products and built them into Neoverb and surrounded it in a graphical user interface that's more consistent with Nectar, Neutron, and RX. The theory there is that if you learn to use Nectar, you'll have no problem using Neoverb. To me, this tool is kind of the apex of potentially the future of reverb. Are we going to go in this direction where you've got one reverb tool, multiple engines, broad capabilities on how you deploy different reverb sounds? I'm not sure. I'm still new to Neoverb. I'm still learning how it works, but it's definitely on my list.
If you do some research into the history of reverbs, you'll find out that they were set up initially in a large room with a speaker at one end and a microphone at the other. And the interesting thing is, what you're hearing is the distance between the speaker and the microphone. And today we still use that description of the distance between the two, but we express it in terms of time. Is it a millisecond delay? Is it several milliseconds? But that captures the size and ambience of the room we're using for at least chamber style reverb. Even spring reverbs and plate reverbs are somewhat measured by the length of the spring or the thickness of the plate. It's an interesting throwback to those mechanical reverbs we started with, when in reality these plugins are completely digital. They're just emulating the original reverb units that were created in the 50s and 60s.
I would like to play for the St. Louis team.
Well, I might arrange that.
I would like to catch. Now, I'm being a good catcher. Tomorrow's pitching on the team and I'm catching.
Yes.
Tomorrow throws the ball and the guy up bunts the ball.
Yes.
Now, when he bunts the ball, me being a good catcher, I want to throw the guy out at first base, so I pick up the ball and throw it to who?
Now, that's the first thing you've said right.
I don't even know what I'm talking about.
I'm not sure it matters if you've got dozens of plugins that are reverbs. It's really up to you. It's a personal choice. I like to keep things simple, and the reverbs that I like and the settings that I like, I tend to reuse over and over again. But there's nothing wrong with variety, right? If you found this video interesting, click on the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel. I always welcome comments and feedback. If you have a different opinion than me, please share it. I'm always interested in hearing that. Thanks for watching.